All right, so today we're going to pick it up where we left off on Friday. Just to recap on what we did, we've been going through this demonstration of this motivating exercise where we've got all this data associated with books, right? And we've been trying to find the best book, we've been trying to find the worst books, and we've also been trying to find all the books written by a particular author, in this case, Frank Herbert. And we tried with an initial solution where we had all these pieces of data, these 5 different pieces of data: the title, the author first name, last name, the year that it was released, and the Goodreads rating here. All 5 of those pieces of data were just completely separate. And then we went and we defined a structure, right? A book containing those 5 pieces of data. Then we realized, well, an author is 2 pieces of data. Anytime that you've got a thing that is composed of more than one piece of data, that should be screaming out to you to put me into another separate structure. And so we created an author structure here. And then we realized, well, date, well, that's a little bit more than a year. Even though we don't have that data here, right? An actual date would be a year, a month, and a day, okay? So we defined all those things, and then we realized that we needed a framework to work with this stuff, to make it easier to work with this stuff. And so we defined some creational functions here. One of them took those 5 pieces of data and automatically created a book for us, a new book, returning a pointer to that new dynamically allocated book. An alternative was to suppose that that book already existed in memory. And then we would take those 5 pieces of data and simply initialize that structure, right? Remember the way that we did that too. The create book actually just calls init book after it creates a book to initialize. Right? So we've got code reuse here all over the place. Then we realized that we also, well, we need some other, utility functions like a deep string copy, right? That's probably a utility function that we've been using now for the last 2 modules and probably will continue using, right? A function to print a book to the standard output, a function to generalize that and convert a book to a human readable format, right? The title, by, and then the author last name, comma, author first name, etc. Right? And then also, if we have creational functions here that can create a book, maybe we also need destructional or destructor functions to free up the memory associated with that book. And that's where we are now. Let's come back over to the demo here and realize now that we've got this framework here, how can we start using it to make this code a little bit simpler? Once we've set these 5 pieces of data up, we can go ahead and hand that off to create book or init book and create that book. But rather than keeping track of the title and the author and the rating and everything like that, what I want to do is I want to not just create one book, I want to take one book and all the books and put them into a collection, right? An array of books. So how do we do that? Well, again, we're kind of cheating here with this particular CSV file because the first line tells you exactly how many records there are, right? Num records. So I could use that and cheat and and allocate enough space for 20 or num records books, right? You don't have that luxury in your current hack today that's due today, right? Instead, what do you have to do? I don't know how many lines there are. So what do? You go through and you count up the number of lines first. And then you go back to the beginning of the file and then you start reading in the lines. Or I don't know how many characters are in the file. So what do? You write a function like we did in class a week ago now to count up the number of characters in the file and then go back and then read them again, right? There are a couple of different ways of doing that. One of them is just to simply close the file and open it up again, right? So we're kind of cheating here in that we're being told how many records there are. So let's go ahead and allocate enough space for num records, or 20 records in this case, right? Well, what does an array of books look like? Books, I'll call it library, right? Does it look something like that? If it's a static array, yes. Right? I don't want static arrays because we've already seen the problems with static arrays. You can't return them from functions. If they're too big, you'll cause a segmentation fault, a stack stack overflow, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want a static array of books. Right? So what should I call my book? So what should I do instead? Dynamically allocate it. Library. Now, if this were an integer array, how would you go about doing it? Int star malloc size of int times however many of them you want. In this case, num records. This is not an array of integers, is it? It's an array of books. So what do you need to do? change it to book, and how many bytes does a book take? However many size of book. Right? The compiler is able to figure that out. Why is the compiler able to figure that out? Because you defined it here. Once you define your own types, the compiler knows what they are. Right? So integer, double, char, those are built into the language. Book is not built into the language, but once you define it, it's now part of the code. Right? Okay. So that's how many I want. Great. Now I'll read each line here. And instead of creating a book, remember the difference between create book and init book? One of them already assumes that it exists, and the other doesn't. It creates it for you, right? It creates the book from scratch. This one assumes that the book structure already exists. Which one applies in this case? Does it already exist? Yes, because we created it. So I'm not going to call create book anymore. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call init book. Okay? Now, remember the difference between the two. Title, author, first name, last name, release year, rating, those are all the same. The only difference is, do we pass in this existing, pre-existing book? Right? And that's what we're going to do now. Well, the book exists. Where is it? Remember, we're iterating over for each record, right? It's in my library, right? But library is an array of books. I want the ith book. So, library sub I. Right? Now be careful. Before I run the compiler here, is it going to complain about this? Let's think about it. Library is a book pointer because it is an array of books. Right? So when I get a particular element out of that array, what type is it now? A regular old book. Is that what this function is expecting? A regular old book? Nope, it's expecting a pointer to a book. So how do I take a regular old book and turn it into a pointer? Ampersand. There we go. Let's see that without the ampersand. Again, it's going to complain. GCC, C, G, wall. Just make sure that everything is compiled with book, right? And everything's good there. GCC, G, wall, book.o, and demo.c. Right? And a bunch of other things right there, but it's going to complain why passing one init book makes a pointer to an integer without a cast. Why? It's a regular old book. We don't want a regular old book. What do we want? A pointer to a book. Right? Okay. Now, that should go away, but there's a couple of other errors here. Warnings, error, book B is undeclared. That's because I should probably take this stuff out, print book and free book, because we don't have those things anymore. Okay? That was just from demonstration last week. All right, now I'm only getting warnings, and we'll take care of those here shortly. Okay? What I want to do now is, well, there's a lot of code here in this demonstration. Let's not lose the forest for the trees here. All I wanted to do was find the best book, the worst book, and all books written by Frank Herbert. Right? This is doing a lot. Right? This is loading up books from a file. Then, ostensibly, eventually, it will find the best book. It will find the worst book. It will find all books by Frank Herbert. That sounds like 4 things to me. Right? If you're doing one thing, and you should only be doing one thing, right, in a function. So let's take all of this code that loads it up from a file, and let's put that into a function. So, because generally, functions should do one thing and one thing only. Right? This is all about code separation and organization. I shouldn't have one function that loads up books from a file, finds the best one and prints it out, finds the worst one and prints it out, finds all the ones by Frank Herbert and prints it out. Right? That's 4 things. That should be screaming out to you. These are 4 functions. Right? So let's take care of the first one first. Right? I'm going to take all of this code here and move it. Let's go over here into the book.h function header file here, and let's go ahead and write a function prototype to load up books from a file. Right? So loads book records or data from the given file. Right? ... Probably going to want some more here. So what should I call this, first of all? Remember that functions generally should be verbs, action words, not nouns. Right? So we should not call this book loader because that's a noun. Right? What's the verb form of book loader? load book, right? All you have to do is invert it, and now you've got a verb, load, the direct object book, and that makes a lot more sense, right? So what should it take as its input? Well, what are you doing right now? To load up the contents of a file, you give it the file name, which is a string, const char star file name path, whatever. Right? Maybe something else, I don't know. We'll find out here in a moment. Right? What should it return? If I'm loading up a bunch of books, a bunch of data, and I'm creating a bunch of book instances for you and giving you an array of books, I want an array of books to be returned. So, what does it look like? Book, star. Right, there we go. Now, likewise, in your load, what is it? Load file lines or something like that, or get file lines or something. We have another variable in there, right? We have another variable that looks something like this, num lines. Why do we have that variable in there? I'm the function. I'm going to load up all of the lines from the file and give them back to you as an array. What else do you need to know? If I just give you an array, is that enough? If you give a function an array, is that enough? No. What else does it need to know? The size of the array. Right? And likewise here, we're going to want to know the number of books, right, that are ultimately loaded up from that file, because we need to know the size of the array. Otherwise, there's no way for us to determine how big that array is. Okay? And that is why it is passed by reference. Okay? Let's go ahead and bring it over here to book.c. Clean it up by bringing over the actual code here. There we go. Start from the top. All right. So first of all, let's do some basic error checking. Anything that can be null might be null, and therefore we have to check for null. What could be null here? Well, file name, certainly. That's obvious. Right. Is there anything else that could be null as part of the input? Any pointer could be null. Num books. If that's null, then let's go ahead and just return null, because that's pretty much the only thing that we could do. Right. Otherwise, we'll load up the file for processing. Okay. All right. By the way, again, this is pure cruft. Right. I'll leave this in here because it's demonstration code. But should you leave a comment like this in your final file? Probably not. Right. And that was illustrated wonderfully by the recent takeover by an incompetent billionaire who just laid off a whole bunch of people, because Twitter is what I'm talking about, because the criteria by which they fired people was locks. Nobody's done this since the 80s. Right? Here is one particular engineer that was not fired because he has a whole bunch of cruft, right? Intentional cruft, right? All this function did was add two numbers together. But look at the number of lines of code that he wrote. Right? So he was able to avoid firing, right? And probably sit at his desk for the next 6 months, twiddling his thumbs and putting together his resume for the next job when it finally collapses. Right? So that is cruft. Do not leave that garbage. All right? I'll leave it here because it's illustrative of a demonstration code. What are we actually doing here? Right? So now I'm not going to open up books.csv. What am I going to open it up? I'm going to open up file name for reading. Okay, file name is a string, and that's what we're opening up. Like somebody could say, "Oh, don't open up books.csv. It's in my data folder, data/books.csv." Or don't open up that books.csv. Open up my library of books.csv or something. Right? All right. So if the input is null, now that we're in a function, should I be exiting and erroring out with an error message here? Nope. That is not how you do error handling. These are the two things that you do not do. You do not echo error output. When you're in the main, these two things are perfectly fine. But when you're in another function, no and no. You return something sensible that indicates that an error occurred. You weren't able to open up the file because it didn't exist, because you didn't have permissions, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Well, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm going to return null. Right? Okay. Otherwise, 1,000, I still don't like that. That's kind of icky to assume that any line will be at most 1,000 characters, but for simplicity purposes, we'll go ahead and keep that. Read in the number of records. We're not doing anything with the highest rated book now, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm simply going to open up create enough room for that for those number of records. Read it line by line. Initialize that book. And again, we're not doing this in this function because this function does one thing. It loads up books. It doesn't do loading up books and finding the best one for you. Those are two different functions. Separate them. Right? All right. So get rid of that. Init book. And then finally we return library. Oh no, it's seg faulting in the web grader, even though it works fine here. Right? So what did I forget to do? Well, I forgot to run, Valgrind to see what was going on, why it was wrong. Right? I'm getting 32,000 lines instead of the 430 lines that are in the file. Well, what did we not do? We didn't tell the calling function how many books we actually read. Right? That's down here. After we read the first line, what should we be doing? Num books is equal to num records. Well, okay, maybe we don't need both of these variables here. Right? And you certainly, sure, we could do something like this, num books instead. Right? Then we don't need this line. But then what am I doing down here? Num books. And what am I doing here? Num books. Stars everywhere. Stars, stars, stars. Don't play around with pointers if you don't have to. All right? Let's restore all of that. And so what? You're paying for one extra variable, right? But by not playing around with pointers unless you absolutely have to, and you only do it once, right? You've reduced the number of failure points, and pulling out your big book of PEMDAS to understand which one of these things actually happens first because it has a higher order of precedence, right? You don't have to worry about that stuff because you're just using a regular old integer here, right? You use that that pointer variable once and only once when you absolutely need to. Okay. All right, that looks good. So now let's come over here to our demo code and realize that we can then get rid of most of this stuff. In fact, I'll go ahead and get rid of all that. And I will call my function instead. What was it? Load books from books.csv and then numbooks. I need that variable, int numbooks. Right. And that's expecting a pointer, but numbooks is a regular old variable. So how do I change a regular old variable into a pointer? Ampersand. Right. I don't need this. I can get rid of this. And I'll get rid of this temporarily. And then let's just go ahead and print them out. Print them out as an ad hoc test. ... Right? So for int I equals 0, I is less than numbooks, I plus plus, I'm going to print the ith book. Because I've already written that, print book, right? Library sub I. There we go. It's not gonna compile, or at least it's gonna compile with warnings, and you're gonna tell me why here in a second. Right? Oops. All right, so line is okay. Let's suppress that. We don't actually use line, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and get rid of that. There we go. Just to make it happy. Oops. Unknown types book. Oh, where did I say books? Here we go. Book. There we go. There. That's why we don't pluralize, right? Just remember that rule in the back of your head. Right. And then bring everything together. And this is what I want to draw to your attention, other than me making the same mistake over here. There we go. Load books. Load. I did call it load books, right? Didn't I? Oh, load books. That's what I want. Load books. There we go. All right, sorry. Okay, there. That's the one error that I want you to help me correct. All right. Over here in demo. Print book. Library sub I. What kind of variable is... Well, first of all, what kind of variable is library? Is a book pointer. Good. Library of I is one of them. Is a book, a regular old structure. What does print book expect? It expects a what? Book star. So once again, how do we change this regular old book into a book pointer? Ampersand in front of it. Get rid of that. There we go. Now remember, this is just printing out all the data. A dot out. Harry Potter all the way down to Game of Thrones. Right? And that is indeed the data that we have in here. Harry Potter down to Game of Thrones. Okay? Now that we have all this framework, right? It took a lot, but once we have it, now the reports are all but trivial. How do you find the best book? How do you find the worst book? How do you find all books written by Frank Herbert? With the remainder of our time today, let's go ahead and fill those out as functions. Okay? So let's come over here and define this function first. Again, if you have functionality, right, it's in the word. Put it in a function so that you can use it. Right? So this function finds the best book with respect to the highest rating, right? And returns it. Right? Okay. Now there are a couple of ways that we could do this, right? Again, remind me which one is the best book according to the rating. I think it's Harry Potter here, 4.62. I could jumble them up though, right? It's not necessarily the first one. It could be somewhere in the middle. It could be at the end, right? The worst book in here certainly is going to be somewhere in the middle, right? I could sort it though, but we're not there yet. That's what we're going to be looking at after your next exam, right? Which is, by the way, this Friday, remember, right? You have midnight to midnight. We'll use lecture as an optional review time, all right, etc. Right? So I'm not there yet. Instead, I'm going to have to go through and do what we did before. Start with a rating. Find the next book with a higher rating. If I ever find another book with a higher rating than that, I will update my what I'm looking at. Right? So get best book, right? And we'll go ahead and take a const book star library. Right? Why const? Am I going to be making changes to any one of those books? Nope. And if you're going to pass in an array of stuff, right? This is no different than passing in an array of integers. If you're going to pass in an array of books, what else do you need to be told? The size, num books. Right? Or you could just go with n here, right? But it's implicit that n is going to stand for the size of the array. I'll go with num books here to be more explicit though. Okay? What's the return type going to be here? Let's think about that after we've tried an initial design of this function. Okay? So help me out. For int I equals 0, I is less than num books, I plus plus. That's going to be our idiomatic for loop, right? That's going to iterate over each book, right? I'm going to compare library sub I, right, the ith book, to the best rating so far, right, dot, dot, dot. If the rating is higher, update some variable to keep track of it, right, dot, dot, dot. And then finally, return the best book, okay? All right. So what would you use to keep track of elements? Well, what are we using to keep track of the first element and the second element and the third element and the fourth element as we go through this for loop? What? The indexes. So let's go ahead, or indices, right? Both are acceptable, I believe, pronunciations, right? So int index of best, okay? What's an initial value that I could start it at that would be reasonable? We'll start by assuming that the first book that we see is the best book. And then look at the second book, the third book, the fourth book, the fifth book. If any of those are better, then we'll just update the index here. So I'll start it at 0. Right? If I start it at 0, then I can actually start my loop at 1 if I want to, because if I compare the first book to itself, obviously I don't need to do any updates. I'll go ahead and leave it like this, though. Right? So compare the ith book if library sub I dot rating is greater than the library sub index of best dot rating, then that means that we've found a better book. Okay? If the rating is higher, update some variable to keep track of it. What's that variable? Index of best. What do I update it to? I. Right? There. Get rid of the cruft unless you're trying to save your job for another few months. Right? Okay. All right. So, what do we return now? Say what? Yeah, so we've got a couple of choices here, right? What if I were to return the index of best? Right? Then I would want to rename the function probably get index of best book, because that's what I want. If I had the index, I could jump to that book and I know which book it is, right? That's one option. Right? In which case, the return value would be an integer. What's an alternative? Yeah, over there, that's the best book right there, right? Book, star. Get the best book. Just a pointer to it. I want just point it out to me so that I can jump to it. Okay. Return what? Library sub index of best. Now, once again, this is the third or fourth time that we've asked it today. What type of variable is that? Is it a regular old book or is it a pointer to a book? It's a regular old book. How do I change that into a pointer? Ampersand in front of it. Okay? Excellent. Let's test that out and make sure that it works. First of all, let me go ahead and cut and paste this. Right? And that will be our final design. Right? GCC, the library here. Discard. Oops. Yeah. Don't worry about that warning there. Right? Technically, what we'd have to do, since the array is a bunch of const books, we'd have to actually return const book star. We're going to ignore that, though. Yeah. Not all warnings are actual code smells, okay? Anyway, let's come back over here to demo. And I want to get that best book, right? Best book is equal to get best book of my library and num books. Right? Now let's print it out. Printf, the best book is, and the line, and then I will print book, right? Best book. Hey, wait a second. I'm not doing that ampersand trick anymore, right? Should I put an ampersand there? Or should I not? Well, what does print book require? Print book is looking for a pointer to a book, book star. What do I have? A pointer to a book. No, you don't need an ampersand here. They match. Right? And this is a consequence of the design decision that we just made to not return the index, but instead to return a pointer to the element instead. Okay? Let's go ahead and compile this now. Again, ignoring that warning. And compile everything together, run it. Now remember that it should give us Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, whatever. Deathly Hallows there. 4.62. Okay. Wonderful. What would it look like to return the worst book? First of all, what would I rename this? Worst, right? Finds the worst book with respect to the lowest rating and returns it. Okay. What would it look like over here? Copy, paste. And other than name changes, worst book, and maybe index of worst instead. There we go. Worst, 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 and worst. Right? Those are just variable name changes. Those are not material at all to the problem at hand. What is the only thing that changes here? Yeah, greater than to a less than. Well, got to type it correctly. There we go. Right. Gee. They seem like the exact same problems. Finding an extremal element, something that is maximum, something that is minimum. There's got to be a better way of doing this, right? So that I don't have to write two functions to do this for min and max every single time, right? And there is a better way to do this. What if I were to use something that we're already familiar with called a comparator, right? Remember how do we compare strings, right? We give them two strings, A and B, and it returns something negative positive, or 0, depending on the relative ordering of these things. Right? What if I generalize that to not just strings, not just books, but things? This thing and that thing. Right? And I want to know, is this thing greater than this thing? I hand it off to a comparator, and it gives me something positive. Right? Then what does that mean? They're out of order. This one is actually greater. Right? What if it gives me something negative? They're in order. This one is the greater thing. Right? They're equal. Okay, break ties however you want. Right? And if I had that as a general purpose function, I could write one min, one max function. In fact, I could write one function for get biggest element, right? And then just flip things around. I wouldn't have to have cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste code for all this stuff. That's what we're going to be focusing on after recursion. Okay, just a preview. Let's see if this works. I want the worst book. Did anybody note what the worst book was, at least in this data set? Worst book, worst book. There we go. Worst book. Oh, I need to compile both, sorry. There we go. 2 warnings now because I'm disqualifying the const quantifier, but it'll still work. I think it's Dianetics. Oh, nope, the worst book is not. Oh, worst book. Oh, because I'm still calling best book worst book. There we go. Right. Again, the pitfalls of copy pasta. Right? Don't just copy pasta. Make sure that you're doing it right. Right. A dot out. There we go. Worst book is Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. Right? Even 2.33 is probably too high. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Otherwise, we're 2/3 of the way through. This is the last one we need to do, and we've got plenty of time to do it. Yeah?
When you call load books, do you need to check if the number of books is null, considering how you've already updated?
Good question. So load books, the number of books is null. We do check that right here. Is that what you mean, or?
Well, why would you need to do that if you're going to update it anyway?
Well, what if it were null? Could I set it? Can you ask Bret Hart? Can you dereference a null pointer? And whack up the high side of the head? No, you can't, right? Because this is null right here, and I'm trying to dereference it. So look before you leap and do something dangerous. Is that, remember that 0 and null are not the same thing, conceptually, right? That if you ended up reading, for example, if num records here ends up being 0, that's another error that we could do. If num records is 0, right, then that means that there's no data in the file. We could return null here as well. Right? That would make sense too. Right? But then what would your books.csv file look like? It looked like this. Right? Well, why do you have that data there? Right? Undo that. Right? All right, so let's get all the books by a particular author. Right? So book star get books by author. Now I could say by Frank, right? But I don't want to just have one author. I want to get all the books by J.K. Rowling. I want to get all the books by Terry Pratchett. I want to get all the books by Frank Herbert. I want one function to solve this problem, not just 50 different functions for 50 different authors. So let's go ahead and get books by author. Right? Okay. Returns a new array containing all the books by the given author. ... Right? Well, if I'm going to return a book array, what do I need to return? Book star. Right? What do I need? I need a library of books, an array of books, to search through, find all the ones by Frank, and give those back to you. I need to know the number of the books, because I don't know if I can't iterate through an array if I don't know how many elements are in the array. What else do I need? The author. And guess what? We have a structure for that. Right? So we could take this by value, author, right? What's an alternative? We could take it by reference. Right? Which do we want to do? When you do things in a certain language, in the style of that language. You do it in the lithic style, right? For example, if you're in Python, you can write a regular old for loop, but it's discouraged. You should be writing for each loops, right? And that's the Pythonic way. What's the C-thonic way? C-ic way, all right? What is the C way of doing things? Generally through pointers. We're not going to be making changes to that author, so I'll go ahead and do it like this. Is there anything else we need? So I'm going to go through these book records. I'm going to find all the ones by Frank Herbert. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 looks like. 6 books. Right? I'm going to give you an array containing those 6 elements. What else do I need to tell you? That there are 6 elements. Right? Same exact problem that we just had with loading books. Right? The calling function needs to know how many are in there. So we'll go ahead and put that down here as numbooks. Can I use the same variable name for the number of books in the original array and the number of books in the new array? Nope. So what? Numbooks in result? Num resulting books? There we go. So it returns a new array containing all the books by the given author, passed by reference. Right? In the array of books library, which, oops, come on. Whoa, that's weird. We're going to have a terrible time today if my enter button no longer works. Haha, sweet. Okay, there we go. Apparently you have to clear the find. That's a bug, I'd say. The books of library, which is of size numbooks, right? The size of the resulting array is communicated in the num resulting books variable. And we're passing that by value with no const because we are going to be making changes to it. Okay. Let's outline this first of all. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate through the library. Right. Dot, dot, dot. If the ith book is by the given author, dot, 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 add it to the resulting array. Right. Okay. Now, that's the basic outline. There's lots of details here. For example, in the what you're doing right now to read in the lines of a file, what's the first thing that you have to do after error checking? You have to go through and count the number of lines, right? So can I create a resulting array if I don't know how big the array is going to be? If I call malloc, I need to tell it, malloc, I need size of book. How many books do you need? Well, however many number by the author, right? I have no idea what that is. So what's my first step? 1, to do error handling. All right, and I'll leave that in your capable hands. 2, count the number of books by the author, dot, dot, dot. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Int numbooks. Can I use that variable? Nope, that's part of the input. Oops. Sorry about that. There we go. That's part of the input. So num resulting books. Well, that's not part of the input, but it is a parameter. I can't use that variable name again. Right? Naming things is hard, especially when you run out of names. N, right? That's a little bit terse, right? Number of books, number of books, right? Then I've got 3 things that mean number of books at that point. Num author books, or author count. I like that, author count, right? Make sure that you're initializing it to 0, right? Remember, in computer science, there are only 2 difficult things: cache invalidation and naming things. Right? That's an old saying. Right? It's an old joke saying. All right, so let's iterate through the library for int I equals 0, I equals 0, I is less than numbooks, I plus plus. Right? And if the library sub I dot author is equal to that author, right? I don't know if that's going to work or not. Then we'll go ahead and author count plus plus. Right? Do you think we could use equals equals? Yeah, that's. I mean, it's not. No, I mean that works for integers. That works for numbers. It doesn't work for strings. Why the heck would it work for structures? Right? Besides, what does it mean for two authors to be the same? Right? That their last name is the same and their first name is the same and their date of birth is the same, which means that their date of birth is the year, the month, and the day. Okay. This is probably another function, isn't it? Right? So let's go ahead and create another function here, just temporarily. Right? Authors equal. Or authors is equal. Author is equal. Yeah, again, naming things, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two authors, const author A, const author B. Right? Why are they const? Because I'm not going to be making changes to it. Right? And now I'm going to return an integer here. 0 for false, they are not equal. 1 for true, they are equal. And then I wonder how we can generalize that. We'll come back for that later on. Right? But otherwise, let's go ahead and write this function so that we can use it. Right? And not have to think about those details. Anytime you come upon, I don't know how to do this, right? Go off, write another function. Then come back and say, okay, I don't care how to do this. I'm just going to call that function and do it for me. Right? All right. So it takes two authors here. And it returns true if their first name is the same and their last name is the same. Right? So if a.lastname is equal to b.lastname. First of all, am I going to be able to do that? Again, the equals didn't work for structures. It certainly does not work for strings. Okay? What do I need to compare two strings? str, cmp. Right? And if A's last name and B's last name are the same, then strcmp will return a 0. Right? And if their last names are the same and their first names are the same, then that's the same criteria. Oops. There we go. I'm avoiding very long lines here. Right? So if the last names match and the first names match, then I will return true. Right? And I don't think I'm using the std bool library. I can be. Right? Std bool. Right? Then I can use true and false. Right? Okay. What's the alternative? If I'm not returning true, what should I return? I should return false. If you don't want to use that library, what would I return? 1 and 0. Right? True and false. Okay. All right. That's not going to compile. Tell me, should I be using the dot operator here? Or should I be using the, what's the other one? The arrow operator. Right? So use the dot operator when? Right? To access member variables of a regular old structure, you use the dot operator. When do we use the arrow operator? Right here. Arrow, it's spanning two lines there. To access member variables to a pointer to a structure, use the arrow operator. Which one do we have? Is that a regular old structure or is that a pointer to a structure? Pointer. So do I use the dot? Nope, I use the arrow. There we go. Arrow, arrow, arrow. Okay. Now I've solved that problem. Come back up here. If the authors are equal from the library sub i's book.author and the author, right? Remember, I'll just quickly say that this is actually a regular old structure to an author, so I'm going to convert that immediately into a pointer to a structure to an author. This is the 5th time we've done this now, so I'm just going to gloss over that, right? Author count plus plus. Okay. Now I know how big this should be. Number of books by the author is author count. There. Book star result is equal to a call to Malik book. There. Okay. Good so far? I think we can knock. Yeah, go ahead.
Would the ampersand and the dot matter with the order of operations?
Good question. In this case, no. But if you're really paranoid about it, PEMDAS. What's the P? Parentheses. All right. There you go. I think it's okay this way, though. Right. Generally, I think the ampersand is very, very low priority. All right. Now iterate through the library again. Guess what? Exact same code here. Iterate through the library. If the ith book is by the given author, then add it to the resulting array. So instead of counting authors here, what I will do is I will say result sub something is equal to that book, library sub I. There. And then finally return result. All right. I'll fix my indentation later. Two things that I have to take care of. Am I ever actually setting this variable, num resulting books? Ultimately, I'm returning the result, but did I ever tell the function, the calling function, how many books are in this array? Nope. Let's do that now. Num resulting books is equal to the author count. Is that correct? The thing on the left-hand side is a pointer. In order to set the value of a pointer, I need to dereference it. Dereferencing means using the star operator. Good? All right. Now, what about this? What index should I use? Can I use I? I is iterating over the books in the library. Right. Let's create another one. Int j. I'll start it out at 0. Result sub j is equal to library sub I. And set yourself up for the next iteration, the next book, by incrementing j. Okay. Let's see if this at least compiles. Right. Oops. I keep making a mistake. Books. Any others? Nope, that's it. There we go. Again, ignore those for now. We might come back to that on Wednesday. While it compiles, does it actually work? Right. So, book, Frank's books, right, is equal to, what do I call this function again? Get books by author. In fact, I'm going to cut and paste this whole thing here because I'm not going to remember the order of all the things that I need to give it. So library, num books, the author, ooh, that's a good question, author, right? And then the num resulting books, int num Frank books, right? There we go. And I'll give that by reference, just like we've been doing here. There. Okay. Let's go ahead and make sure that it works. We're going to have to come back and fill that question mark here. But I will want to make sure that it works by printing them all out. For int I equals 0, I is less than num Frank books, I plus plus. I will go ahead and print not the worst book, but Frank's books, sub I, putting an ampersand in front of it because it's a regular old structure and I need to make it into a pointer to a structure. Okay? Now, fill in this question mark here. I need a key, right? A key to unlock a door. Right? If you're going to go through all the books and find books by a particular author, you need that author. A is equal to, just declare it, right? A dot first name is equal to Frank. A dot last name is equal to Frank, or Frank Herbert, right? I'm not going to be able to do that, am I? We started out with our book design trying to do something like this, and it failed because we never set up memory enough for the first name. We never set up memory for the last name. What did we do instead? We realized that, hey, it would be really nice if we had a function to do this for books. Well, now we're realizing that, hey, this would be really nice to have a function to do this for authors. It'd be really nice to have a function to do this for dates, et cetera, et cetera. I won't worry about that just now. Instead, I'm going to cut and paste this and be quick about it. Right? Frank, and Herbert. Right, there we go. And A dot first name, A dot last name. Oops. There's my key. I'm going to pass it in as a pointer here. And we'll pick it up there next time. I just want to see if this works really quick, though. So compile that, and run it. Hey, cool, right? So the worst book is, of course, still Dianetics, but we've got all 6 of those books by Frank Herbert. All of them excellent, by the way. Right? Read them today. Not today, but put them on your reading list today.